Officer Wilson was convinced he could humiliate anyone, especially a black woman who, in his mind, had no business being in his station. Little did he know who she really was and how badly he had misjudged her. But when the truth came out, his life turned into a living nightmare. Let's start from the beginning. The sun blazed down on the parking lot of the small police station in Alabama, where the day-to-day chaos was just another Tuesday. Cars shuffled in and out, officers gathered in loose groups, exchanging laughs and idle gossip. It was the kind of place where the air hung thick with a mix of humidity and the sense that not much ever changed. That's when she arrived. A black woman, mid-30s, stepped out of her sleek sedan. Her outfit was sharp but understated. Clean lines, neutral colors, the kind of attire that said she meant business without shouting it. Every step she took radiated confidence. She wasn't here to mess around, that much was clear. Her presence, however, caught the attention of Officer Wilson. Wilson, a stocky white man in his 40s with a permanent scowl etched on his face, had a reputation. He wasn't just another officer. He was that guy. The one who could turn a simple interaction into an interrogation just for his own amusement. When he spotted the woman, his expression shifted to a smirk that could curdle milk. "Hey you," Wilson barked, cutting across the lot like he owned the place. His voice carried loud enough to turn a few heads. "What's your business here? Come to turn yourself in, or are you looking for someone who already did?" The woman paused mid-step, turning to face him with a composed demeanor. Her gaze met his without flinching, a quiet but firm challenge. "I'm here on my own business, officer. Your accusations are entirely misplaced," she replied, her tone even, not an ounce of emotion betraying her calm. But that calm only seemed to fuel Wilson's fire. His smirk widened into something more malicious. "Oh, so you think you can just stroll in here like you've got rights or something?" he shot back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Folks like you don't just walk into my station unless they're being escorted in cuffs." The parking lot had quieted, all eyes now on the scene unfolding. A couple of officers nearby shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. A few civilians lingering around their cars began recording the interaction with their phones, sensing the tension building. The woman's stance didn't waver. "Officer," she began, her voice taking on a harder edge, "I am repeating myself for the last time. Your assumptions are unfounded, and I have no intention of engaging in this nonsense. Now, if you'll excuse me." But Wilson wasn't done. He stepped forward, blocking her path with deliberate arrogance. "Oh, nonsense, huh? We'll see about that," he sneered, turning his head toward two younger officers who had been watching from the sidelines. "Hey, you two, escort her to my office. I've got a feeling she's exactly what I'm looking for." The younger officers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Wilson's reputation preceded him, but disobeying a senior officer wasn't exactly an option. After a moment, they moved toward the woman. "Ma'am, if you'll just come with us, one of them said, his voice trailing off under her piercing gaze. She sighed, her lips tightening into a thin line. Without a word, she allowed herself to be escorted into the station. Her movements were still measured, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. Meanwhile, the crowd in the parking lot buzzed with murmurs. "What's going on?" one person whispered. "Who is she?" another asked. Phones stayed trained on the scene, capturing every second. As the woman disappeared through the station's double doors, Wilson lingered outside for a moment, basking in his self-proclaimed victory. "Guess she thought she could walk in here like she's somebody," he muttered loud enough for others to hear. "Well, not on my watch." Inside the station, the tension only grew thicker, and though Officer Wilson didn't know it yet, he'd just walked straight into a trap he'd never see coming. The office was small and cramped, the kind of space that seemed designed to make people feel cornered. Officer Wilson walked in first, tossing a thick folder onto his desk with exaggerated importance. He didn't bother looking back at the woman who followed him in, her calm demeanor only sharpening his irritation. "Sit down," he barked, gesturing toward a worn chair across from his desk. She complied without a word, her movements precise and deliberate. Wilson plopped into his own chair, leaning back like a king on his throne. He grabbed the folder and flipped it open, not bothering to hide his smirk. "Let's cut to the chase," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You're not supposed to be here. People like you, well, let's just say you've got two options in a place like this, working or sitting behind bars. And honestly, you look better suited for the second one." The woman's expression didn't change, though her eyes hardened slightly. "Officer," she said evenly, "you're overstepping your authority. Your actions will have consequences." Wilson snorted, closing the folder with a loud snap. "Oh, so now you're threatening me? Let me tell you something, lady. You don't get to make demands in my office. I've seen plenty of your kind before, walking in like you own the place. Well, newsflash, you don't." He stood up, looming over her, his smirk widening. "You don't belong here, and you're about to learn that the hard way." The woman's voice remained steady. "I suggest you reconsider your words, Officer Wilson. You're making a mistake." Wilson leaned in closer, his tone dropping to a threatening whisper. "Don't you dare talk back to me," he hissed. And then, with a final display of contempt, he spit directly in her face. For a moment, everything froze. The room went silent, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Behind the closed door, a pair of younger officers stood frozen, having overheard the entire exchange but too afraid to intervene. The woman didn't flinch. She slowly pulled a handkerchief from her bag, wiped her face with deliberate care, and then fixed Wilson with a piercing gaze. "You've crossed a line," she said, her voice sharp and controlled. Before Wilson could respond, the door to the office burst open. Captain Grayson, the commanding officer, strode in, his face a storm of authority and frustration. His eyes darted between Wilson and the woman, immediately taking in the scene. "What's going on here?" Grayson demanded, his voice cutting through the tension. Wilson straightened up, his bravado faltering. Captain, I was just handling a situation," he stammered, his tone suddenly defensive. Grayson turned to the woman, and as recognition dawned on his face, his expression shifted to something akin to panic. "Agent Harper?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman stood, brushing off her jacket as though she were shaking off the entire encounter. She pulled a slim folder from her bag and handed it to Grayson. "Captain," she said firmly, "you might want to take a look at this." Grayson opened the folder, his face paling as he read. Wilson stood frozen, confusion and fear battling for dominance on his face. Harper turned back to Wilson, her voice steady and calm. "You've just provided me with all the evidence I need," she said. "And trust me, Officer Wilson, you're going to regret every word." The silence in the room was deafening, as her words landed like a gavel, the promise of justice hanging in the air. Wilson froze, his head snapping toward Captain Grayson like he'd just seen a ghost. His usual bravado drained from his face, leaving behind a pale, stunned expression. Before he could stammer a word, the woman calmly reached into her bag and pulled out a sleek professional folder. With a deliberate motion, she placed it on the desk between her and Grayson. "I am FBI Agent Ivy Harper," she said, her voice steady but laced with authority. "I'm here conducting an investigation into abuse of power and fabricated charges in this precinct. And as of 5 minutes ago, one of your officers just volunteered himself for the top of my list." Grayson's eyes widened as he processed her words. He hesitated for a moment before opening the folder, his hands slightly unsteady. The more he read, the redder his face became. His anger was visible, but it wasn't directed at Harper. Meanwhile, Wilson stood in the corner, his jaw working soundlessly as if trying to form a defense. Finally, he found his voice. "Captain, this has to be some kind of mistake. She's lying. She doesn't have any proof." Harper raised a single eyebrow, her calm composure unshaken. "Proof, Officer Wilson?" she repeated, reaching into her pocket. Out came a slim silver recorder. She held it up for a moment before pressing play. The room filled with Wilson's own voice, dripping with disdain and malice. Every insult, every word he'd spat at her earlier replayed with crystal clarity. Harper didn't flinch as the recording echoed through the small office, each word landing like a hammer. When the playback ended, she calmly clicked it off and placed it on the desk next to the folder. "I think that covers the last 10 minutes, she said. "But don't worry. There's plenty more where that came from." Grayson's glare shifted to Wilson, his expression a mix of fury and disappointment. "Wilson," he said, his voice low and firm, "you're under arrest for abuse of power, falsifying reports, and inappropriate conduct. Hand over your badge and weapon now." Wilson's face twisted in panic. "Captain, you can't be serious. I've been here for 15 years. This is my station." "Not anymore," Grayson snapped. "Your actions are a disgrace to this department, and you will face the consequences." Harper stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. "Captain, this is just the beginning," she said. "I'll be conducting a full audit of your precinct. Every case, every complaint, every shred of paperwork will be reviewed, and if I find anything else like this—" She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "There will be more arrests." Grayson nodded, his posture stiff. "Understood, Agent Harper. You'll have my full cooperation." The tension in the room was suffocating, but Harper remained composed. She turned to leave, her steps measured and deliberate, while Wilson was escorted out of the office in handcuffs, his protest falling on deaf ears. Within days, the incident went viral. Videos recorded in the parking lot were shared across social media, showing the confident yet calm demeanor of Agent Ivy Harper and the explosive fallout of her confrontation with Officer Wilson. The story made headlines, shining a harsh light on the precinct's practices. Agent Harper became a national symbol of accountability and justice. Under her guidance, the precinct underwent significant reforms, implementing stricter oversight, transparency initiatives, and mandatory training on ethical conduct. What had once been a hub of corruption slowly transformed into a model of fairness and integrity. Harper's work didn't stop there. She continued her mission, ensuring that justice was served not just in one precinct, but across the region. And though the road was long, she walked it with the same unshakable resolve that had brought down Officer Wilson, and set a powerful example for others to follow. What would you have done in Officer Wilson's place? Do you think he could have handled things differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something similar? Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you and sparked reflection. This story was created to shed light on important issues and inspire positive change in our world. Your voice matters. Together, we can make a difference.